Well, we're back. Let's talk about some pretty intense video coming out of Madison, Wisconsin, showing state workers, teachers, others really protesting against Governor Scott Walker's proposal to have public workers contribute more to pension funds, but also his efforts to undercut collective bargaining for state workers. We don't have to deal with that so much in Florida because we're a right-to-work state. But my question is this: could there be an aggregation of issues or policy changes in this environment where people would be so aggravated and so frustrated that during the 2011 session they would be motivated enough to come to Florida, to come to Tallahassee and raise heck about what's going on?
School teachers. I mean, I can certainly see that. If they keep getting their pay cut and more demands put on them and teach more kids. And we had a very controversial education bill here a year ago that I think they rallied around. There's a lot of attention brought to it. I think it's on everybody's radar. That's the one I see potentially, I think, that could lead to something. I'm not sure you're going to get it as massive as where the strong union state as you have in some of the northern states, and where teachers are paid very well by comparison to Florida as well. But I could see that potentially.
I agree. I think that if there is a group that that they ought to be worried about, it's the teachers. I mean, we've already talked about the possibility of changing the pensions, the education budget. Education and healthcare have to be part of what they look at hard when you talk about cutting the budget. We've got a budget that's over $3.5 billion in the red, and they got to cut somewhere. And just like at the federal government, it doesn't make sense to sort of nibble around the edges. If you don't talk about entitlements, you can't really get any big cuts. In Florida, if you don't talk about education and you don't talk about health care, you can't deeply cut the budget. Everything else is just kind of little slivers. And education is on the chopping block. Governor Scott's budget talks about, what is it, a 10% cut, in per student funding. It's kind of a variable cut, but we're looking at possibly 10%. When you start telling parents of school kids that the per student funding might go down by 10%, and then the teachers who have to also work under those constraints. I think Brent's right. I think both teachers and public school parents, might be a constituency that we might see a few of up here.
But to pick up on what you're saying, the choices that are faced by these legislators and the governor are pretty grim. I mean, if they want to have a reserve on top of the $3.6 billion in cuts, if they want $1 billion or $2 billion for next year, the cuts have to be even deeper.
Don't forget they want to raise tax or cut taxes.
They want to. Well, that's what the governor's talking about. And you're talking about, you got to cut education, you got to cut health care. And so in the end, I think it's going to be a pretty brutal last week. Any chance that we could see this spill over, Mary Ellen, to special sessions, line item vetoes, vetoing the entire budget?
Well, there's a lot of unknowns here, and because of that, I think there is a possibility. We don't know how far Rick Scott is willing to go in pushing his promises. His budget really did match a lot of his promises. But he realized there's some practical point at which he couldn't even pursue some of the things that he had promised when it comes to prison reform, for example. However, we don't know if he's going to veto a budget that doesn't include all of the tax, the property tax cuts he wants. We don't know if it doesn't include the consolidation of agencies. He has not engaged at that point with the legislature. So there's a lot of unknowns. If he decides to just say, here's my idea, my budget's going to pass, as he has predicted, and then they don't pass it, how far does he push them? I don't know.
Brent, it's kind of a maxim around here, has been for years, that the success of a governor is very dependent upon how he performs or his relationship with the legislature. And you've got a Senate president named Herodopoulos and a speaker named Dean Cannon, And whether or not he gets a lot of stuff done depends on whether or not he can convince them to follow his lead. Early soundings, what do you think?
Well, let me go back a few more months maybe and remind everybody that is watching the show that they were very strongly behind Governor Scott's opponent for the Republican nomination. And one of the most amusing things was to watch how quickly these folks tap danced right back to the center stage with the winner when he won the Republican primary. Saying that, I think Mary Ellen was talking about unknowns. I think one of the big unknowns, and I think it's Governor Scott, he is so far pretty much talk the talk, I think, or walk the walk, however you want to look at it. And I think he's a ramrod type guy. He's used to that from his corporate background. And I think they're going to have to make some pretty compelling cases. And plus, you're dealing with one of the, and Senate President Herodopoulos, whose political ambitions can't be discounted either, in which way he might say, well, you know, let's see, what'll the voters be thinking, you know, when I'm on the ballot next year, and maybe weighing who his potential opponents are. There are just so many unknowns. I mean, from that standpoint, I don't think we've ever gone into a session.
But one thing that, and this is not a very popular thing among in most households, but the bottom line is that Rick Scott can propose all he wants and ramrod as much as he wants through, but the legislators are the ones that have to make it work. And I think the one sense that I'm getting from this legislature is this governor does not understand how this process works. And I think there is a lot of frustration, and I would say I've heard a lot of insulting remarks behind the scenes about this governor that I haven't heard for a really long time. And it's because I think there is a sense that the legislature feels that he is going to have his way without trying to engage them into how do I make this happen? Come along with me.
Though, Mary Ellen. That's the message he sent to voters to get elected.
Right, and to me that is, you know, he's going to have a year where he can say, they didn't do it and I don't like it. Mm-hmm. But at some point, voters are going to want performance. They're going to want results. And I don't know how long you allow that dynamic of my way.
Speaking of voters, let's switch gears for a minute and let's look at the 2012 elections in Florida, because even though it's barely 2011, we haven't even gotten to the session yet, there's a lot of jockeying and talking about 2012 presidential elections in Florida. It's a critical state, and the 2012 race for the United States Senate. David, who are the likely contenders for the Republican nomination for the United States Senate?
Well, we've already talked about Senate President Mike Herodopoulos. I think another candidate who's toying with the idea of running is U.S. Representative Connie Mack. I think he would immediately be a high-impact, high-profile candidate. He has a well-known name, whether it's because you knew his dad, the United States Congressman, United States Senator, or because you are a baseball fan and you know his great-grandfather's name. George Lemieux, who left the seat, is toying with the idea of running. Who else has been mentioned? Who am I missing?
Former State Rep Adam Hasner.
Oh yeah. So I mean, there's a big Republican field that's already shaping up to potentially run against Bill Nelson, senior United States Senator who was elected in 2000 and would be seeking a third term.
And he's a Democrat.
He is a Democrat, and I think he is. He may be vulnerable. His fate is tied to the fate of the national economy and the state economy, I think. I think if voters are still angry in 2012 because 1 in 10 of them don't have a job, I think he's highly vulnerable. That anger vote is still out there. If things are getting better, I think he's got a better chance.
All right, we got less than a minute. Brent, this goes to you. Can Obama win Florida in 2012?
Oh, I think definitely, and I think maybe the high-speed rail controversy might play into his hand, and the health care stuff could end up playing, and we don't even know who his opponent is. So the Republicans are going to have a formidable opponent, I think, to knock off an incumbent president, unless they just runaway unemployment.
Final word, Mary Ellen. Can Obama win in 2012?
I think that right now I can't predict anything. I mean, I just think everything is too uncertain. to be honest.
Wise answer. Thank you, panel. We'll see you again soon.